Good evening, members of the House. I declare the 23rd Board meeting of the 175th session duly constituted. I call upon the Secretary to read the minutes from the last meeting.
Once we've got one of these that isn't going to collapse midway through. On the 11th of April 2024, the Queen's University Belfast Literary and Scientific Society convened for the 22nd Ordinary Meeting of the 175th Session to debate the motion, "This House believes we are not alone in the universe." Yes. As usual, the meeting began with announcements. President Toft apologised for the state of the upcoming debate. Dermot Hamill, HLM, raised the upcoming Queen's University and Ulster University InterVarsity debate. And Jack Steele announced a training workshop with Matthew Bryson, HLM. If you're wondering, you've missed every single one of these if you did not go to them. Following the reading of the minutes, the meeting moved on to private members' business. Ryan Hoey, HLM, raised the death, and Dermot wrote this, so quote, "a great man," end quote, O.J. Simpson. Responses were heard from Dermot Hamill, HLM, Hugh Child, Sam Hazlitt, and Rory McSparren. Jack Steele raised the death of Margaret Thatcher, which I believe is actually the anniversary. Okay. Responses were heard from Sam Hazlitt and Misha Gerard. Misha Gerard raised the divorce of Sacha Baron Cohen. There were no responses. President's questions then took place. Myself, I asked if the President would rename the Society in light of recent proposals to rename the Foreign Office. The President responded, no. Ryan Hoey, HLM, asked if you had been falsely accused of something, what would it be? Trespassing. Tom Burns asked, why is trespassing the best crime? Quote, because it is, end quote. Rory McSparren then asked, and then this went on for a while, and I'm just going to ignore that. After President's questions, a vote in prior opinion then took place. There were 24 votes for the proposition, 4 for nay, and 4 abstentions, so the proposition had it. First in the proposition was Jack Steele. Speaking from the Gospel, many would be surprised at that, Jack argued that he is in fact not a radical nor a revolutionary. He said that we are not alone with the Lord with us, God the Father, and he explained the Holy Trinity, created by God the Eternal Spirit, and as Dermot's written, quote, the real big G, end quote. Life is not limited to humanity, and the opposition are solitary individuals. Jack says that we should all be reading from the good book. First in the opposition was Zach Savage. He had made a great mistake by coming to the debate preparing a serious speech, not realising what he was getting into. He said that all of the debate is speculative. All alien is science fiction, and that UFO sites are proven to be hoaxes, mistakes, or rubbish. UFO sightings lead to more sightings because of hysteria. This is all hearsay and not real evidence. Second on the proposition was a maiden speaker, myself. I started using a slideshow, and the President at this point buried his head in his hands and started to weep. I sat down and addressed everyone here, and nobody else. I then talked about the slides. And I discussed some of the real hit movies of all time, such as Oliver Stone's JFK and 1492. And there was also mention of the Ulster Scots language. O.J. Simpson and Charlie Haughey were also referenced. And this sort of went off the rails. And then we went on. Second in the opposition Henry O'Riordan. Normally, watching debates. Okay, Dermot, this is utterly unhinged what you've written here. Something about Galileo and E.T. I'm not reading this. And then he went to private school. Something about private school, and then mentioned loneliness and smoking whiskey, whatever that means. And then we're not alone, quote, E.T. and the boys. Yes. Third speaker for the proposition was Misha Gerard, regretfully. Star Trek aliens was what came up, and that is all I will actually explain in speech because it was one of the most horrific things I've ever heard seen. And she was very happy to say that she destroyed feminism with facts and logic. A former president of at this point, Russian Keenan glared. Third speaker for the opposition was Jacqueline Bonner, who in this instance was actually the most sane speaker thus far. Well, bar one. Jacqueline Bonner, the least tinfoil hat debate speaker apparently, according to Dermot Hamill. Mathematics, according to her, does not actually exist, and that she distrusts the government and the aliens. And then something about us being all delirious in here, probably, well, I mean, you would expect that based on the tone of the debate, and that the US government is, quote, based and alien-pilled, end quote. And then another quote, and I'm not sure I'm really qualified to speak in this as a member of the Church of Ireland, quote, "I'm a Star Trek fan. I am also a lapsed Catholic," end quote. Then there was a formal accusation of heresy to Jack Steele. Final speaker for the proposition was Cormac McSparron. I'm not reading the name there. Quote, "I thought that movies were real," end quote. I can't read this in polite conversation. Then attacked Dermot Hamill for going to a fee-paying school and that King Kong was a great movie because it reminds him of the Reagan administration. Cormac and, there was stuff about notepads and the opposition can't explain what Stonehenge is. Then his father was mentioned, which is apparently an important thing. Final speaker, thankfully, was somebody who's not going to be named because they've been banned by the Irish Bigfoot organisation and the SDLP Youth on Facebook. Quote, "They said that I am, quote, of sound mind," end quote. We're not going to refer to who they are. There was apologies to the President and the Acting Secretary for what was to be said, for there's no accountability to actual information going on here. The prop believes in Santa, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, and apparently George W. Bush. Doctor Who isn't real, but the Smurfs are. Then the speaker also challenged the existence of God, asking God to strike him down. He's not here tonight. And he says he has never met an alien, which, having been to his family house, I think is quite unlikely. And then there was discussions of Bigfoot and being scared of trees. Questions were heard from Roisin Keenan and Ben Wilson. Following the debate and questions to the House, the vote on speakerability took place. There were 11 votes for the proposition, 7 for the opposition and 12 abstentions, suggesting that a lot of people had actually left during the debate. So the opposition had it. Can I take the minutes as read? Aye.
Thank you for that, Mr. Secretary. And can I firstly begin by apologising to our guest chair who had to sit and listen to last week's minutes. Welcome to the 23rd ordinary meeting of the 175th session for the motion "This House would elect the House of Lords." Before we begin, the eagle-eyed of you may spot that we do have a guest chair in attendance this evening. We're delighted to be joined by Lord Weir, former Minister of Education, Member of the Legislative Assembly and current trustee of this society. So thank you for being with us this evening. Before we get into the order of business, we'll move briefly to council announcements. Does anyone have any announcements? Mr. Hamill.
So we should all be loudly after tonight's debate to engage in some pints and non-alcoholic beverages. I'd also like to announce that from our Queen's and Ulster University InterVarsity debate, we raised £130 for our chosen charity of the year.
Do we have any more council announcements? No? Okay, we'll move on to private members' business. For those of you who are new, this is the section of the evening where you can raise anything you wish to discuss and have seen in the news this week or something you're interested in and wish to put before the House. Do you have any piece of private members' business? Right.
So, this week the government has put through a bill that will make it illegal for anyone born after 1st of January 2009, is it? To ever purchase a pack of cigarettes. Now, as someone who is a nicotine addict, I think this is disgraceful. It is an attack on the rights of future generations to enjoy cigarettes. And also, an interesting thing that's happened is that the DUP voted against the legislation in Westminster. There seems to be a bit of a uncertainty / controversy about whether it'll actually apply in Northern Ireland. Now, I think what actually has to happen is that the Northern Ireland Executive has to put something through to approve it applying over here. But I very much hope that they don't, and I hope the mandatory coalition for once creates deadlock in the right way and blocks this obscene piece of legislation from applying in Northern Ireland.
Do we have anything on this? Dermot?
I think this is an example of the nanny state reaching into our homes and the future homes of our young people. And I think that it ought to be condemned at every given moment. And that I think if we allow this to pass through our Parliament, then God knows what else they will try to pass. and they will be controlling us. This is something that will be reported as positive in Pravda, and we ought to oppose it at every turn. And I hope our dear friends in the Lord will oppose it.
Our dear friends. Do we have anything else on this? Sam? You've surely got something to say on this?
Oh yes, well I'm sure I can think of something. Well yes, to be honest with you, I do think it is fairly ridiculous. I would expect it of the Labour Party, but although I'm not a massive fan of the Tory government at present, I would have expected them to stick up for personal freedoms. I mean, what greater freedom is there is for the freedom of children to smoke cigarettes? It is a what's next scenario. I mean, people will say it's ridiculous, but what's next? Unhealthy foods, alcohol, God knows.
Thank you. Do you have anything else on this?
I think it's quite damning for this society, given that 2 months ago at the EGM, I think we brought back the most exalted ashtray bearer to the society, which is now a man without a job. I know he doesn't exist yet, but I'm sure Ryan will be deeply disappointed for future generations of smokers in the society that no one will dare to hold an ashtray. This is quite damning.
Just to come back on this, just to give us all a bit of hope, prohibition has never worked, so actually the future generations of the society will be able to smoke. They'll just do it illegally, as with all outlawed substances. I think it's going to be really interesting once it gets to the point where those who are banned from once it gets to the point where it's just got to 22-year-olds being banned, or 21-year-olds being banned, but 22-year-olds are allowed, and I think a lot of future Queen students will have a very good living off selling cigarettes to the students in the year just below them.
If anything else on this?
I just want to point out that when this was first announced, Sam Hazlett, ardent unionist, betrayed the words Chucky Arlaw upon the announcement of such a ban. So I'd just like to welcome Sam to our dear Republican brotherhood.
Anything else on this? Do any other piece of private members' business?
So, in shock horror, another Conservative minister has been suspended for perceived malfeasance. I know, in shock horror, Angela Rayner might have sort of, maybe or not, did something with around £1,000 to £2,000 of council tax. A Conservative minister has now been suspended for embezzling over £50,000 from the Conservative Party to clean up someone's carpet he threw up on. So what do we feel about what has quickly become basically the equivalent of a peep show sketch?
Do you have anything on vomiting on carpets on two houses? Right.
I've had to Google this because I've not actually kept up with the news on this because there's so many that come up at the moment that it's hard to keep track. It wasn't. Did you say 50,000?
Oh, sorry, it was 5,000.
£5,000. Yeah. I thought that was very interesting.
Keep that on the carpet.
But I will defend Mr. Mendes because he does not Mendes. How do you say his last name? Menzies. Because he represents a constituency in the great county of Lancashire.
Do you have anything else on this?
If the carpet's that expensive, what is it made out of? Is my question. Are we talking a diamond carpet or
The public's tears, probably.
Do you have anything else on the public tiers, Zach?
I think it's made out of second.
Anything else on whatever that was? No? Do you have any piece of private members' business?
As we know, Donald Trump's hush money trial started this week, and he sent me a $5. Never mind.
Do you have anything else on this? No? Okay, we'll move on to the worst 5 minutes of the evening, which I'm constitutionally required to do, and that is President's questions. Do we have any questions this week, and keep them nice and professional?
your ties get a bit stale, Mr. President?
This is it. Friends of the British Overseas Territories tie? No, absolutely not. I'll endeavour to do better next week. Max.
How are you doing, Mr. President?
Very good. I've just been to Bangor for the first time. I'm even better. Bangor. Bangor. Thank you. Yes. Maybe.
That's where he got us.
What did you have for breakfast this morning?
Nothing. Like every week, nothing. Anything else? Zach.
If you had common ground to spend on your own carpet, what design would you turn it into?
Dan. Dana.
I think that is very nice, Mr. President.
I agree, and I also think your tie is very nice. Some similarities between the two.
What's your favourite board game?
Not played. Anything else before we move on? Thank God. We'll go to the vote of prior opinion now. This is how you think on the motion before you've heard any of the speakers this evening, and just to remind you, we'll have a vote on speakability at the end. The motion being this House would elect the House of Lords. If you'd like to vote in favour of the motion, please raise your hand now. 6.
Oh, they're recording.
If you'd like to vote against the motion, please raise your hand now. And if you'd like to abstain on the motion, please raise your hand now. 3. Can we get the vote of prior opinion, please?
Right, on the question at hand, votes for the proposition were 6, the votes for the opposition were 12, and there were 3 alliance voters who sat on the fence. As a result, by about a West Tyrone margin here, the opposition has it.
Before we get on to the debate, I'd now like to invite our guest chair, Lord Weir, to make some opening remarks.
Well, members of the House, future hereditary peers, like I say, I'm very honoured to be here tonight to chair this meeting. I come from the period at Queen's, which actually is just whenever I was on the car on the way up, established the period in which the Literific wasn't active in that regard. I'm absolutely, I think, slap bang in the middle of that. So I didn't have the opportunity for any debate practice or opportunity to be involved in that debate, and I put that lack of debate practice absolutely at the heart of my future career then in the Northern Ireland Assembly and as a public representative. And there are many others who owe that opportunity to them. I'm looking forward very much to the debate tonight. I suppose, like any impartial chair, it would not be right at this stage then for me to give my views on the subject. Coated as I am with self-interest and in relation to this issue, suffice it to say that if any of you do not want to make me redundant and put me into the job market, you'll be voting with the opposition tonight. Can I say, I suppose, that with the Lords, and just as I said, I don't want to hold up the debate, one of the unusual things about the House of Lords from a procedural point of view, which differs greatly from Commons or the Assembly or indeed the Oireachtas in terms of its procedures, is that all debates are self-regulating. So that generally speaking, the Speaker, whoever is chairing the meeting, does not intervene unless they really have to. The idea is that everybody's supposed to be on their best behaviour, behave politely. And I'm sure in the true spirit of the Literific, that will be something that will be echoed here tonight in that regard. So I look forward to a debate which is robust, which is humorous, which above all abides within the rules. I'm not quite sure whether the House of Lords drew its procedures from the House of Lords or the House of Lords drew its procedures from the Literific, or whether the two are coincidental. But as a member of the House of Lords, I look forward particularly to this debate, and I wish you all the best. And I also, I suppose, finally want to add my congratulations to the Literific Society on how successful they've been, particularly in recent years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before we welcome the first speaker, I'm going to run through a list of rules for the evening. A full list of rules to our standing orders are available on our website. Each speech is 7 minutes long, with the first and last minute being protected time. The end of the first minute of protected time and the start of the final minute of the speech will be signalled by the bell, which means you can only offer points of information during the middle 5 minutes of any speech. To offer a point of information, raise your hand and say point of information on that point, or simply POI. Please keep your POIs to 10 seconds long and no barracking, meaning wait at least 15 seconds after you or any other member has given a POI to give another one. Once you've made your POI, you cannot go back and forth with the speaker. If you need to leave the room at any time, do so quietly between speeches. Do not leave or re-enter the room whilst the speaker is speaking. Remember that any noise from outside travels in. And lastly, no swearing. In line with tradition, if a speaker swears, they will be fined a bottle of port to be presented at the next ordinary meeting. Without further ado, can we welcome Hugh to open the case for the proposition.
Just going to preface this by saying I'm not good with public speaking, not used with it, so this is going to go very well. Alright, so first of all, the House of Lords should be elected. I mean, we do claim to be a democracy, this country. The United Kingdom has at least claimed to be a democracy for nearly 1,000 years. We have the Magna Carta showing that we have at least tried to take power away from one person and pass it on to as many as we can. And yet, we've still got the House of Lords, a group which isolates power into the hands of the few at the cost of the many. The House of Lords itself holds 781 members, which outnumbers the House of Commons by 131. 92 of them are hereditary, 25 are bishops of the Church of England, and not one single member is elected by a member of the public that isn't from the group of hereditary peers. In 2012, the Liberal Democrat Conservative Coalition White Paper found that the fundamental democratic principle is that those who make the laws of the land should be elected by those to whom those laws apply. And can we be a democracy truly without that? Can we even pretend to be a democracy by maintaining an archaic group of the unelected that maintains a divide between those in power and those to whom those powers apply? The current method of appointing into the House of Lords is naturally one of the largest issues. Lords are appointed by two methods. You've got the House of Lords Appointment Commission, which is an independent advisory commission, which seeks people with, and I quote, a record of significant achievement, outstanding personal qualities, and the ability to make an effective and significant contribution to the work of the House of Lords. But there is no real scrutiny there. There is nothing actually checking these people over whether or not they are actually qualified. No qualifications are actually even required to be in the House of Lords. You just have to know the right people, shake the right hands, and get lucky. Alternatively, you can be elected by a party leader. 216 members are elected by party leaders, with again, no accountability. You need to look most recently at David Cameron, who was appointed into the House of Lords in order to fulfil a place on Rishi Sunak's cabinet.
On that point,
Go ahead.
has he not done a far better job than any elected member of the House of Commons as Foreign Secretary? And he doesn't actually have to go to constituency surgeries, and also, like, the Secretary of State in America isn't elected to be simply appointed to that position.
Okay, to respond to that, do you think that America is a good example of a democracy? We've also got Evgeny Lebedev, a former member of the KGB, who donated to the Conservative Party and now holds a seat in the House of Lords. Now, is that part of the cash for honours scandal, or is it just basic cronyism and corruption done via the Lords? Either way, there is no accountability. You might be sensing the common theme of a lack of accountability now. The facade of democracy has become incredibly large within our government now. I mean, we are the second largest legislative body in the world, and yet more than 50% of that body is entirely unelected. Are we even a democracy?
On that point,
Sure.
but the Lords can't create or pass bills. It requires the session of the Commons. So are they really creating laws by themselves?
36% of the House of Lords speak less than 5 times a year, work openly with lobbyists, courting cash and selling adjustments to legislation. Yes, they do change legislation. In 2007, the Labour government published a white paper proposing 50% elected to the House of Lords. It ran a series of unwritten votes to see how on this issue and found that a majority of 337 MPs voted for a wholly elected second chamber. The outright cost of the Lords alone is one of the largest issues. The House of Lords, excluding estates and works expenditure and non-cash items, costs £104 million. Members' finance scheme totaled £21 million. There's been numerous scandals based on what the House of Lords members have done with their money, with money that they have forced the public purse to pay for. For example, Baroness Wilcox charging £300 a day in travel expenses to the House of Lords, despite her living 200 metres away. Lord in 2023 claimed £18,000 for attendance allowance. That was money to show up.
On that point,
Sure.
are these not issues that affect legislatures of all kinds? How does this relate back to your actual proposition to elect the Lords? You get abuses of these systems in elected chambers as well as unelected ones?
Because with these issues, there is no accountability. There's no punishment for them. It's for life. You cannot change that. They do not receive any punishment, no way, nothing. They just face the public scrutiny, but nothing happens as a result of it. The House of Lords can, as of 2022, claim £340 a day for attending, plus travel expenses and subsidised bills, of which they have complained about the sub-quality caviar. The estimate is that £15 million worth of waste is produced due to Lords simply not showing up, or just claiming expenses which do not even apply. 58% claim more than the average pay of a UK citizen despite out-earning them without it. Accountability exclusively comes in the form of public ridicule, but there is no comeuppance for these Lords. The purpose of the House of Lords itself was to form select committees to investigate certain issues, and they have actually done a pretty good job with this. For example, the Savile inquiry into the Bloody Sunday shooting, and now the Brexit Select Committee, which is looking into the corrupt nature of Brexit. But why can't this be done with an elected Lords? Why can't this be done by the judiciary? Why can't we have a Lords which actually works for the people and by the people? Instead, we can mimic other systems such as the US, Germany, France, and I know what you're thinking, I hate the French. Anyway, even with the dysfunctional Lords, it would be better for the public to get a say on it. At least it would be democratic. At least we would have a choice in who runs the country, truly. And the question isn't, should we change the Lords? It's, why should we keep it the same? Thank you.
And then opening now for the opposition is Rand Owen.
Mr. President, my Lord, ladies and gentlemen, just firstly to give a point of rebuttal to Hugh's argument, the accountability comes from the fact that they have to pass everything back to the House of Commons, like the amendments that were put forward apparently on behalf of lobbyists. Most of the amendments put forward by the House of Lords are accepted by the Commons. So now to get into my speech. For over a century, the composition of the House of Lords has loomed large, yet the path forward has remained rather elusive. In this debate, I'm going to urge us to shift our focus from the surface level debate of legitimacy to a deeper consideration of the House of Lords' true purpose and efficacy. My argument is straightforward. We must prioritise defining the proper role of the House of Lords and ensuring its effectiveness in fulfilling that role. To support this assertion, I will make 3 key points. First, any reform must prioritise the efficacy of the House of Lords in complementing rather than simply replicating the elected House of Commons. Second, we must understand the House of Lords' constitutional function, recognising its role as a revising chamber and an essential check on executive power. And finally, we must consider the unique institutional context of the UK's parliamentary system, understanding that the House of Lords' limited powers do not necessitate the same level of democratic legitimacy as the House of Commons. In debating House of Lords reform, we often get tangled in one key question: how should we elect its members? Should they be elected or appointed? While this is crucial, it eclipses deeper concerns. We overlook the question of efficacy. What is the House of Lords supposed to do? What powers should it wield? Why do we even need it? This tunnel vision leads to the simplistic notion, encapsulated by Hugh's opening argument, that electing the Lords is a panacea, but that's simply not the case. Rather than fixating solely on composition, we must first define the House of Lords' proper role. What should it achieve? And then we can explore how its composition can best serve that purpose. Electing the Lords might not align with its constitutional objectives. The aim isn't replication, it's complementarity. We need two chambers that work in harmony and don't simply duplicate each other. I'm arguing that electing the Lords risks making an institution meant to act as a sober second thought into one dominated by political parties. The inclusion of legislators in the House of Lords who don't owe their place in Parliament to our defunct political parties is vital. It provides a diverse perspective, acting as a counterbalance to the House of Commons, which often echoes the government's voice.
On that point,
Go ahead.
you say that, but the majority of people in the House of Lords were Labour or Conservative people, and many people were put onto it that were Labour.
But the government doesn't have a majority in the House of Commons. There is a large group of crossbench peers. And I think that a non-elected Lords can better maintain the balance, bringing in expertise and scrutiny without the pressures of electoral politics. In essence, our focus on the House of Lords composition overshadows its true essence, which is effectiveness. So today, the House of Lords, as Hugh's gone over, comprises approximately 800 peers, primary life peers, appointed by successive prime ministers to serve for life. And this functions as a revising chamber, and the House of Lords has placed two critical constitutional roles. Firstly, it scrutinises government legislation, providing thorough examination of proposed laws, and secondly, it serves as a platform to prompt the House of Commons to think again. But, despite its influence, the House of Lords lacks, and this is the key point overlooked by Hugh, the power of veto. It can merely delay legislation for up to a year. And this limitation, no thank you, acknowledges its status as a non-democratic chamber compared to the House of Commons. And this is crucial in our constitutional framework. Unlike countries with written constitutions enforceable by the courts, the UK relies on internal mechanisms for checks and balances within Parliament. The House of Lords fulfills this role by offering a counterbalance to the powers of the government and of the Commons. Without this internal constraint, there would be an absence of effective oversight within the legislative process. The constitutional functions of the House of Lords underscore its importance as a revising chamber and a check on executive power. Its composition, devoid of direct democratic mandate, allows it to fulfil its role without undermining the primacy of the House of Commons. I think the problem with electing the House of Lords would be that you would end up with, like the US system with the Senate, where you'd have gridlock between the two houses. The limited power of the reason that the Lords can accept its limited power. The reason the Lords can accept its limited power is because it doesn't have a democratic mandate. As soon as it has a democratic mandate, it will demand more powers, and then there will be gridlock. Go ahead.
You can absolutely have reduced powers from elected states, such as the French Senate, for example.
No, I simply don't believe that would be the case. I'm not. I don't really look into the French Senate about anything that is French. But I think that the key point here is that democratic legitimacy is not an essential prerequisite for the House of Lords. Unlike the House of Commons, which holds supreme authority in decision making, the Lords primarily serves as a check on the House of Commons, and its limited powers are built on the acknowledgement of its secondary status in constitutional framework. While the current system of appointment by Prime Ministers has its flaws, I will accept that, moving towards an elected Lords isn't the solution. The focus should be on addressing concerns about patronage and cronyism without fundamentally altering the nature of the institution. Rather than diving into detailed proposals for reform, the key point of my speech is that we need to understand the fundamental purpose of the Lords within the broader context of the UK's constitutional setup. The debate on House of Lords reform must proceed with a clear understanding of its constitutional roles and limits, so electing the Lords conflates the issues of legitimacy and democracy without addressing the fundamental need for a revising chamber that acts as a counterweight to the executive-dominated House of Commons.
Welcome now, Thomas, the second speaker of the proposition.
This is really nice. Can you keep this? Can we keep this? Mr. President, members of the opposition, members of the House, my lord, ladies, gentlemen. America, 435 and 100. Ireland, 160 and 60. Canada, 338 and 105. Australia, 151 and 76. I'm not using the French as an example this time. These are the proportions of seats in the lower and upper houses of the named countries respectively. I don't know if you notice how the first one is always bigger. I'll go through them again. 435 and 100, 160 and 60, 338 and 105. Everyone got that? I've got one more for you if you have. United Kingdom, 650 and maybe 790. What on earth is going on in the House of Lords? Why are there so many more peers than there are MPs? How did they get there and why did they get there? My friends, I fear there's something rotten in the state of Great Britain. The supposed mother of all parliaments has at its core a gaping failure of democracy and accountability. To be honest, there are quite a few, but I've only got 7 minutes. I'm going to focus on one, which delves into some of what Hugh touched on before. The appointment system to the House of Lords. Something that was, at the time, in the turn of the century, a monumental reform and modernisation of the upper house, but it has been misused and abused for far too long now. An elected House of Lords could change this, an elected upper chamber could change this. Rather than jobs for the boys and jobs for the mistresses, allegedly, system, a more democratic upper chamber could put a stop to this kind of cronyism. And this isn't to take away from those who are rightfully appointed services, people who have dedicated their lives to public services, to their constituents, to the good people of Strangford and Ballyholme. This is to right a moral and political wrong that has festered for far too long. Now, in parliamentary systems like Westminster around the world, the upper house is often smaller because its powers are significantly lesser than the lower house. It's been touched on already before, but we'll go through it again. The upper house is meant to be a revising chamber, an advisory chamber to the lower house. It often has limited powers because of this. It can rarely outright veto legislation, nor can initiate legislation in some cases. In the House of Lords, it cannot initiate money bills. It can amend legislation, but as has been touched on, it cannot kill a bill in its entirety. At this point, I could get into a whole thing about the Parliament Acts of 1911 and 1949, as much as I'd love to, I'm not going to bore you with it. The Lords can delay bills rather than stop them entirely, for no more than a month for money bills, and no more than 2 sessions or 1 calendar year for public bills. I feel like I'm losing the room. Furthermore, through the Salisbury Convention, the Lords does not oppose government manifesto bills. So even if it does counterbalance the government or the lower house in some way or another, that is inherently hamstrung by the constraints that it has to being an unelected chamber. An elected chamber could do so much more and do it so much better. Thank you. In terms of legislative and accountability power, then, the Lords does some of what we've seen this week with the Rwanda bill, what's called parliamentary ping pong by people in Westminster Village mainly. A bill comes from the Lords, or to the Lords from the Commons. They debate it, they add amendments, they send it back to the Commons, which agrees or disagrees with some or all of the amendments. It's then sent back to the Lords, which further amends or insists on the previous amendments, or goes back to the Commons again, and so on and so forth. At this point, I've lost all of you. The powers of upper chambers in parliamentary democracies are heavily restricted all the time. And this is why they need to be smaller. It's something I live by and say all the time. Bigger is not always better. Am I right, fellas? Fellas.
On that point?
Yes.
So you're talking about how you need to reduce the chamber, but the motion is about electing them. How is if the motion as it stands is that we would just elect all 700, not reduce the size.
Well, it's the thing I get to earlier on, which is the appointment system is part of the reason why it's become so massive, because people just continue to be appointed all the time. There's no upper limit, it continues to grow and becomes far too big and unfit for purpose based on that size. There's no need for a larger upper house that has fewer powers than the lower house, so why do we have 790 odd peers in the House of Lords? No one actually knows how big the upper house is because there is no upper limit on the number of people. It's somewhere over 800, but no one's got an idea of how much it actually is. It's far too bloated for what it is. It doesn't need to be that size. The Appointments Commission is the reason why it's like that. So I want to focus a bit more on that appointment system. Peers are appointed for life, as has been discussed, by the King on the advice of the Prime Minister, but due to constitutional restraints on the monarchy, this is entirely the prerogative of whoever's got their feet behind the desk at Downing Street at the time. Between January 2020 and June 23, 313 new life peerages were announced. That's over 300 members of the legislature there for life, appointed in 3.5 years. The House of Lords Appointments Committee HOLAC vets party nominations to the Lords, but sits in a purely advisory capacity with very, very little teeth. So the Prime Minister could appoint members HOLAC has raised concerns about already. Johnson did this in 2020 as an example by appointing former Treasurer Peter Cruddas to the Lords, despite reservations from HOLAC. We're watching more and more peers get crammed into chamber, already fit to burst, almost entirely on the whims of whatever the Prime Minister wants and decides on the day. And it's not like they're all benefiting our democracy and doing a great job for our politics. In 2022, the Lord Speaker, Lord McFall, noted the quote, inactivity of many of its members, which I think might be a bit of an understatement. We've seen plenty of footage of peers falling asleep on the nice red benches and read plenty of stories of peers not turning up and claiming expenses nonetheless. The system currently works more or less as like the pat in the back for those the PM deems deserve one, rather than a truly effective system of appointments for scrutiny and for accountability.
On that point.
The House of Lords is fundamentally undemocratic. It's been touched on as a good thing, but I'm not entirely sure if I agree. It contains members granted their seat on account of being a bishop in the Church of England, which annoys me for that reason, but I think annoys Sam and James more for the fact that it has something to do with drums in churches or something. I don't know. It contains members who've been granted their seat by mere accident of birth, like Jack will be someday. It contains members granted their seat by a Prime Minister grateful to campaign donations or for their willing acceptance of millions in very dodgy PPE contracts. What kind of democracy can we really call ourselves if the majority of our parliament is made up of unelected members? If we don't even know how many people are in our upper chamber, no thank you, we've run out of time. If we have no right to recall or hold accountable over half of our legislature, there's no truly compelling argument to a completely unelected upper house, I don't think. Now, I don't think tradition is a bad thing. I think President Toff's gown, or Lord Weir's gown today, makes him look very, very dashing. I think the Portfine's a pretty solid bit we've got going, to be honest. But a completely unelected, unaccountable chamber of over 800 is taking the bit a bit far, even for me. Elections allow us to get closer to our democracy, take control of our legislature back into our own hands, decide who gets to represent us. There have been plenty of models put forward before, and all of them have democracy at their core. A body like HOLAC could perhaps be expanded to give an enhanced role to make sure there's a fair system of accountability and check on those members. Now, I'll be honest, the Lords does do some decent work. I can't deny that. Despite its flaws, it can provide a very good check on the government. But it's got a damning image problem. When people think of the Lords, they don't think of Lord Clark's, the Lord Mann's, Baroness de Sousa's, the Lord Weir's. They think of Baroness Charlotte Owen, of Lord Lebedev, of Baroness Michelle Mone. They think of cronyism and of backhanders. There's a democratic ideal at stake here, one that withers and wanes with each further resignation honours list. With each passing day, party donors get a seat for life. I'm going to wrap up very quickly here.
If you could bring your remarks to a
I think we've tinkered around the edges of this too often with not enough done to truly reform it. Electing Lords goes a long way to remove those bad actors. I think the good actors should have nothing to fear by being put forward to the people. I don't think we should ever let the perfect stand in the way of the good. We should never let the decent stand in the way of the better.
The second speaker for the opposition, Jack.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, friends, Peter, Mr. President. I note that the first two proposition speakers in their disturbingly modern arguments appear to be taking us down, whether they like to admit it or not, to the road to abolition. That's the clear aim here. And the clear aim is to undermine the British parliamentary system that we have established over a very long period of time. Reaching the whole way back to the 14th century, which Peter and I both consider to be indecently recent. We had the establishment of the two houses back then, And then we moved to the 15th century where we had the Lords Temporal, who had an almost hereditary right to sit there, and that has been solidified through history. In 1649, we had the same type of people like Hugh and Tom in the Civil War who abolished the monarchy and the Lords, but then like the phoenix, the Lords rose from the ashes and emerged again, safeguarded in 1689 by the Glorious Revolution, which assured parliamentary sovereignty. I give way.
I recently heard a big fan of
All I want to know really is, Tom, is would you actually take a seat if you were appointed, and would you take less issues then? Anyway, the House of Lords must not be elected because principally it undermines the indelible role that it plays within the British Constitution. These can be seen in the immortal words of Walter Bagehot, the great constitutionalist, who said, and I quote quite simply, "The House of Lords, or rather, the Order of the Lords in its dignified capacity, is very great." End quote. Of course, I'm willing to concede that the reform could be enacted within the Lords, and we have witnessed this most noticeably with the 1911 and 1949 Parliament Act, which placed considerable constraints upon peers and brought them to where we are now. However, the imperative outcome being the reinforcement of their constitutional position as a revising chamber, which Ryan has already touched upon. However, we cannot keep allowing revolutionaries and radicals to have control. Apologies, Ryan, but I may invalidate our entire argument right now. But in 1999, the House of Lords Act was passed. And it was shameful. It was, Ryan, very shameful. It was a British tragedy of Shakespearean proportions, and it removed all hereditary peers. This was the precipice of decline in Britain, political decline, and an overt attempt from New Labour to bring us to the point of no return. Generation and generation of devoted and unwavering service, from the Duke of Abercorn to the Duke of Leinster to the Duke of Wellington. Sadly, I may not have been able to be there to decry the insanity of 1999, but I know Peter did it for me. But I will encourage every one of you tonight not to vote for this motion. Because what is the gain from electing the House of Lords? Ryan has already made a very sombre and most well-articulated resolution to the democratic deficit. However, I do feel it is worth noting that the apparent wickedness of a lack of democracy within the upper chamber has not really had a profound impact upon the moral or ethical fibre of peers. They've still been able to vote with their morality, such as in 1829, Catholic emancipation, 1833, the abolition of slavery, or in much more contemporary context, 1967, they decriminalised homosexuality. They didn't have to do this with the public on their backs or on their tail ends. It was because they felt it was right. And we should let them, no thank you, we should let them take up their mantle and to pursue what they believe to be ethically and morally right. We've seen again, as Tom's already mentioned, with regards to Rwanda. Whether I agree with it or not is a different matter. The House of Lords is a wonderfully unique political instrument of the British Constitution. There is no need to elect the House of Lords. You see, regardless of what political reservations they may hold, peers are responsible to nobody save themselves. Whether life peers like Peter, or 14th generation peers like John Skeffington of Viscount Masseroon and Farad. They do not need labels because they take their seats within their own right. They take the whip because they desire it, not because they require it, nor are they payroll MPs, no thank you. No envious constituency watches their votes or notes how assiduously they attend to their duties. They have not to trim their sails to the breeze of public opinion. They can decide as their reason or their private interest indicates, free from any constraints. Ultimately, we need a second chamber because our policy must be checked. The Commons naturally spends most of its time on government legislation of the day, and that time is consumed, the rest of that time is consumed by party controversies. No, because you didn't give way in the Fought debate. Whereas the Lords day to day and week to week does its work without much controversy and unrest. Albeit there can occasionally be uproar, like when Lord Bates resigned because he was late to a debate. However, if we elect the Lords, it will merely serve to pollute the adherence to duty that they maintain so wonderfully. Peers retain considerably more experience than civil servants, than MPs, because they have an ability to study their subjects in greater depth, to deal with broader policy issues like foreign affairs, defence, Commonwealth relations, without being inconveniently occupied. The Commons, in its stereotypical way, can often succumb to the populism of the day rather than functioning on the basis of what is accurate, correct, and indeed true. Sometimes there's few peers present for debate, as has been touched upon by both of the first speakers. Sometimes there's 80, but whilst a perfectly reasonable observation, the benefit of this is grounded in the fact that those peers are there because they want to be, not by necessity of a three-line whip or by a payroll or because the public have to see them. And in fact, what you do find is that peers that attend on a regular basis are former ministers, governor-generals, ambassadors, people with immense wisdom like Peter and political weight that they can throw at the subject because it interests them. There is no gain from publicity for peers, and they speak when it is desirable to do so rather than making frivolous remarks each week. I'm conscious Peter's probably going to tell me to hurry up in a second. So, all I'll just say is that the House of Lords should not be elected. The habits of the peerage and the institutions which their names helped are thus still a fair constant in the shifting sands of modern British society. Like the peers in their estates, the institutions they support and which support them are battle-scarred, yet they still stand. And unless a violent upheaval on this side of the House dislocates the genteel manners of the British people, it looks quite likely that they will be with us unelected for quite some time. And I am delighted to hear that, because the House of Lords continues to preside with fatherly benevolence over the hasty and impetuous activities of the Commons populace and its elected representatives. Thank you.
Oh, sugar.
The third speaker then for the proposition is Kira.
So I'm going to begin this speech tonight by addressing some of the points that have been made by yourselves so far. First of all, there was an argument made to us that essentially, if we were to elect the House of Lords, that we would keep 800 of them. That is not the case. In this debate, we can frame the way this election would take place. Because of that, we can say that we are going to have far less House of Lords. Because to be quite blunt, there's too many of them. We all can agree on that. There's no point in having almost 800 of them, considering that 13% of them don't attend. 1 in 7 have never spoken in the House of Lords. 36% of them speak less than 5 times a year and have worked openly with lobbyists, cash and all that kind of jazz. And that is an issue that needs to be addressed. It's the reason why the British public look at such scandals such as the PM having people who supported their party into the House of Lords and oh buddy, if you scratch my back, I scratch mine, that has left with the British populace feeling that the government does not represent them anymore.
On that point?
No, thank you. That it represents, essentially, elite people that have gotten there through essentially being friends with the right people and not being elected by the likes of you and me. Now, an issue that has been addressed is this idea that if we were to elect the House of Lords, this would automatically lead to a deadlock, that legislation would not pass. Oh God, all we do is just sit there and just pray that they'd maybe get legislation passed. But a very important aspect to note is the fact that in our system, they cannot veto legislation, which is very important. We would have the same power, which means that this aspect that they have been talking about all night, but we can't give them too much power, they are supposed to be a revisionary body, we would keep that. So it means that we wouldn't have the really awful aspect of America where legislation can't pass because the upper house has too much power.
On that point?
No, thank you. Now, because I'm going to talk about something tonight to do with something that you actually praised a lot of in a previous debate, but now just thrown out the window, which is democracy. Now, what I'm going to point out is the fact that there is a growing distrust in the British populace at this moment in time. They feel that politicians do not represent them. And this is heightened by the fact that many people, the likes of you and me, for example, are complaining that because, say, the House of Lords is mainly centred around people who live and work in London, that they cannot represent the people who live out in the Midlands or the South or the likes, or here, for example, because most of them are centred upon London. You cannot know local issues without living there yourself.
On that point?
No, thank you. So if we elected the House of Lords, we would address this issue, that we would have more representatives from further out than London, so at least they would have a different perspective and they could bring new things to the forefront that could be more representative of the British populace as a whole, which is what the British populace has been crying out for years now, seeing more scandals to do with people overspending in the House of Lords, seeing the likes of Labour in 2007 appointing the people who essentially, who made donations to the Labour Party. You see these headline after headline, and you start to really think, is the government for me? Is the House of Lords there to help? And I know they are there to help. I completely admit that the House of Lords is crucial to essentially getting legislation through, correcting it, and then send it back, which in our system we would keep. So essentially, they would say, they'd write the piece of legislation, they'd send it to the House of Lords. The House of Lords, I believe, can only send it back approximately, it's kind of a given that they usually only send it back 2 to 3 times, and then the max they can hold it back is a year, which is the current system that we have at the moment. They cannot essentially veto a bill, or they can't push back a bill that was on the mandate of the elected party.
On that point?
Yeah, sure.
All of this is based on convention. Are you arguing we should have a written constitution in which these things are explicitly laid out? Because if you don't have a written constitution, then an elected chamber would assert its authority more.
Here's the thing. You believe that essentially if we were to have an elected house, that they would automatically just vie for more power and really go for it, when in reality they cannot make the legislation. The House does. So the problem is, I highly doubt they will turn around and go, we're going to give them infinite power, because that will be a massive problem for any party in the long run. No, I'm not reading that. So that's why we're doing this. We want more representation from other perspectives, and also we want to essentially get rid of this idea that is partly true of a lot of people elected to the House of Lords are elected because they're buddies with the Prime Minister instead of actually earning their place there. And yes, there are people who are appointed that earn their place. The problem is a lot of people aren't. So that is what I'm saying tonight. More democracy with the same power ultimately leads to a better system. Thank you very much.
More power with more democratic responsibility will lead to a constitutional crisis. That's what will happen. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to first say thank you, Proposition, for outlining what your model is for this debate at the very end of the debate. And I fully appreciate that. And I wish to engage with it toe-to-toe. I've already voiced my displeasure with previous Proposition speakers tonight on how somehow by electing the House of Lords, the financial cost of the House of Lords will disappear up until the first speaker. That if it will not remove people from applying for the House of Lords, which is a system based on scrutiny, as mentioned by Mr. Hoey, that is meant to scrutinize, and somehow we will avoid losing people with skills by turning this into a popularity contest. This isn't adding up, and I want to engage with the model right now, dead on. The fact of the matter is that the proposition will not address the fact that we have a clause in the United Kingdom called parliamentary sovereignty, which is the fact that the House of Commons is the supreme chamber in the land, and whatever decision they make goes. If we make the House of Lords the representative chamber that they are proposing, we have a constitutional crisis on our hands. Which chamber is superior? Because it's got to be one. And then the problem is, if we elect it as an elected scrutiny chamber, I'll take that in a minute. If we make it an elected scrutiny chamber, what person is actually going to run for this position? Because it's going to be with a party. Realistically, you're not going to have candidates. Yes?
Why wouldn't the House of Commons remain the superior chamber?
Well, we actually have to hash that in a court case. Because realistically, the feasible thing is that this has to go to the Supreme Court to decide it. And that is going to be a case that will take a year or two, and that means it's a year or two in which the House of Lords is out of function. Now, under its current system, we have seen the Lords take the government to account when no one else would. During the coalition government, who was it who stopped the austerity measures? It wasn't the Supreme Court, definitely wasn't the Commons. It was the House of Lords. They held up the austerity proposals, got it changed, and actually led to a beneficial thing. Why? Because they weren't beholden to an electorate. They weren't beholden to right-wing populist policies that were obviously terrible and we know now to be terrible. They were able to think by themselves and not have that pressure behind themselves to actually make what is the objective best decision in the long run. They're arguing that somehow by electing this chamber, this will be magically different to every other upper chamber ever in the history of democratic society, and this will not cause deadlock. And they mentioned France as an example. France isn't currently going through a problem in which the government can't pass laws. This is the hypocrisy of the proposition tonight. The problem is, I'll take that in a moment, the problem is that the proposition is dealing with a different question to what we're meant to be debating. They're talking about how the House of Lords isn't fit for purpose. They need to prove that this is meant to be elected, and that is the best way to move forward.
This week, the third round, the House of Lords sent back the third time amendment, which the Commons and the government has repeatedly rejected. So to the point where it's due sort of tradition, there's going to drop it. So where is actual scrutiny there when they've made all these sort of great ideas and it's going to have to be dropped eventually anyway?
Well, the fact of the matter is that most governments are unwilling to commit to delaying bills constantly further and further. A government's on a time scale. They can't be seen to not pass too many bills. They have a quota that they feel they need to reach to see that they need to deliver to the executive. That's why the majority of the coalition government's proposals for austerity were watered down from their original proposals. It does work. Yes, this is a rare example in which that might not work, but in the grand scheme of things, historically it does. There's only been 7 bills in a history of the House of Lords in this current state in which they've had to invoke it. And one of them was on hunting, which I know Jack Steele will go, oh! But equally, I want to propose to you 2 not elected alternatives. You're right, when Lords aren't attending. So why do we not just currently impose mandatory attendance? Make sure any Lord who is currently 90% or less attendance is dropped. That doesn't make you an elected chamber, but it solves the problem of attendance, and it means the people with the skills do show up, do give that scrutiny, and gives a better alternative. Also, sure.
What skills is Charlotte?
Okay, Best question. You're saying that the problem is with the power of patronage. Remove it and give the power directly to the independent body that will assess people on their actual merits. Give them the ability to remove people who doesn't show up, and also make sure that it's a not political process. This is meant to be based on merit, not on politics. All this will do is exacerbate the problems of appointing Tory treasurers, because all you're going to do is, all right, we've handed you that £100,000. Instead of doing it straight away, we're just going to put you on the candidate roster. That's not solving the issue. That's making the issue the only way to get it in our current system. To deal with cronyism, ironically, you kind of have to be less democratic in this regard and remove the politics from this chamber. None of those proposals that I've made there are about electing the chamber. They solve the issues that the proposition has brought up. The election will only delay it by a year, make it really political and inefficient. It will also, for the lack of a better term, mean not necessarily that we're going to reduce it. It's not going to be reduced by like 400. It's going to be reduced by 200. That's still a second chamber of 600 people who have less power than the Commons, still elected, expected to do the exact same thing, and we're expected to think that it's okay to give those elected representatives less right. What gives us the moral authority to do that? And there's not an argument in which I believe it's actually feasible in which that's the case. The proposition has debated a separate motion to what we have debated tonight. They've proposed solutions that could be dealt with in completely undemocratic alternatives, which are far beyond election and are much better. And I believe wholeheartedly that the opposition is the only side that has debated the motion tonight, and as a result, I am happy to propose.
On behalf of the proposition to
Members of the House, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary, our dear Lord, Sam. It's a pleasure to once again be back in the Senate room, standing up here with a much nicer piece of furniture. Thank you, President Emeritus Black, for that. I found some of the points very interesting tonight. I think it was Jack who brought up, of course, the former generals, the ambassadors, the wonderful business folk who also make up the Lords, and luckily Hugh and Tom and Ciara also brought up the Tory and Labour donors, the dodgy businessmen and the prime ministerial mistresses. The skills exhibited by Baroness Charlotte Owen or her ability to advise MPs, definitely not sleep with the Prime Minister, definitely not sleep with the Prime Minister, and we promise she didn't sleep with the Prime Minister. But I find it really interesting to stand across the debate from someone from a firm Brexiteer like Mr. Hoey. Of course, I too stood for Brexit, taking back control from dirty foreign European bureaucrats and handing it over to our good unelected bureaucrats. Those are good British bureaucrats, except for Lord Lebedev of Siberia. Take back control from dodgy businessmen in Brussels and hand it to dodgy Brussels businessmen in London. Hand over control from lovely Belgium over to Russia. It's really not looking great why we should keep our dear House of Lords.
On that point,
Okay.
I didn't support Brexit for democracy. I voted it.
No, I'm cutting you off. Ryan's dear love for the standing orders means he knows he has to follow that. I want to regale you all with a story that Lord Weir will be familiar with. It was when former Rangers Football Club owner Craig White claimed that the DUP offered to get him a peerage in exchange for a £250,000 donation. And if that doesn't show problems with the House of Lords, I don't know what does.
On that point,
Give me a moment. Cash for peerages really is the word of the day and always has been in our dear House of Lords. Whether that was dirty Tony Blair, and I'll just point out that the point about Craig White was, I think, as recent as 2015. So it's not. It didn't end in 98, Jack. In 99, Jack. I'm sorry. You see, us on the proposition, we stand for a clear 3-word slogan: take back control.
On that point?
No. The Lords act at their own whim, as pointed out by Jack. They appear when they need to, appear when they want to. Of course, and isn't that wonderful that they can appear at any given point? And then Max comes behind and puts forward the model that we should have mandatory attendance quotas. So what is it, guys? Do you want them to show up whenever they want, as much as they want, whenever they like? Or do you want them to have mandatory attendance? So if you two can decide between yourselves, take a little moment, Max, and decide between the two of you, rather than knifing each other in the back. You sat through the BP workshop, no thank you. And on the point of not appearing, I want to point out in 2018 it was reported that £1 million was paid in expenses to 60 peers who never spoke in the Lords. Are we really getting bang for our buck? They won't even speak in our dear, wonderful, unelected Parliament. And that is why I stand before you and I say, it is time to get together, and I'm very sorry, Lord Weir, I think you look wonderful in the Lords, and you looked even better in the red gown, but I'm afraid we must stand here and tell you that take back control from them. Put control in the hands of our own elected bureaucrats. Take power away from Brussels, take it away from Russia, and hand it over to us, the dear people of the United Kingdom. No, whether it's crying, God save the King, or, Chucky our law, we have the right to elect whoever we wish. We ought to elect... Sorry?
Your press office, no?
I don't have a press office. That's my Twitter. Whether that's we must hand power over to those who deserve it, those who we as the people, we are the people, as the people of Rangers FC claim. We ought to stand beside them and elect whoever we like. Elect our own people, rather than the dodgy businessmen, the dirty mistresses, the folks whenever Theresa May fired peerages at whoever would back her Brexit deal, Nigel Dodds. Let's stamp out cash for peerages. Let's stick our middle finger up to Tony Blair, who also blew up Iraq, so we don't like him. Let's stand together, put our hands together for democracy. Come together for democracy, our one fundamental value. Put power in the hands of the people and elect a chamber which will have proper scrutiny, which will sit there as a revising body, but with our confidence, which will actually show up, rather than handing it over to unelected Borough of London bureaucrats.
On that point?
Sure.
But, sort of going back to what I proposed in my speech, if we introduce mandatory attendance, that's not a problem. Why is specifically electing this chamber the only way to solve that issue?
Well, I'll deal with that, but Jack disagrees with you. So if you could maybe work that out between the two. But because they would also have public confidence. We're going to be able to have public confidence in the fact that they can do that. They have no legitimacy other than the fact that, they didn't sleep with the Prime Minister. So we ought to actually come together and elect them, because then, whenever it comes to, say, 5 years down the line or 7 years down the line, we can look at them and go, oh, they haven't shown up, out they get. So let's take away dodgy dealings, let's take away dodgy mistresses, let's hand power back to democracy, and, well, let's elect the House of Lords. Full proposition.
And then conclude for the opposition is Grant.
Thank you, Mr. President, my Lord, Mr. Craigs, fellow speakers, fellow members of the House. Tonight we have heard an awful lot of utter rubbish from the proposition regarding the need to elect the House of Lords. They come to you with their promises of the land and milk and honey and talk about democracy. But I'll expand on what the first speaker on the proposition said about democracy and about how the UK has supposedly been a democracy for 1,000 years. Oh, my dear,
A historical child. What can I begin but to tell you that Britain has not been a democracy for 1,000 years. The Magna Carta simply set out the relationship between the king and the nobility, and it's about achieving the balance, at the delicate balance at the heart of the ancient constitution of which I am so proud. Effectively, we heard tonight that the House of Lords isolates power into the hands of the few, that the methods of appointment, the House of Lords Appointment Commission and the party political appointment process concentrates powers in the hand of cronies. And we've heard examples like Charlotte Owen, Michelle Mone, Evgeny Lebedev and some others, but lest a few bad apples do not spoil a whole collective.
On that point.
No, thank you. I would like to set out, and one of the key points that has not actually been addressed by the proposition, they've talked a lot about election, but they haven't actually discussed the impact of the election of the Lords would have on the legislative role of the Lords. I would contend that to have a fully elected upper chamber would cause a crisis of legitimacy at the heart of our parliamentary system. What we would have is a system where the parties in the Lords that have contested elections for the Lords would be seeking the same mandate as the House of Commons. At the moment, the House of Commons has been described as an elective dictatorship due to the electoral system first past the post that allows parties to basically force through their whatever manifestos that they're elected on effective opposition because they're always guaranteed to win votes in the Commons. What stands in the way between effective tyranny and effective scrutiny? It's the House of Lords. And I would contend that it's best to have an unelected chamber than an elected one, as imperfect as it may be at times. To have an elected chamber means, and I work for an elected representative, so I know about the constraints on time and resources that being an elected representative has. Elected representatives are in the chamber maybe up to 3 days a week, and it's very difficult to specialise right across the piece in terms of different policy specialty areas, whereas the Lords provides through its speaking rights that it accords members of the House of Lords. It's because the Lords are not beholden to popular elected politics, that allows the Lords the time to invest in areas of specialty and expertise that they bring to areas of policy. And over the period of years, former ministers, former chief justices, yes, even the Church of England bishops, which at times is frustrating as they may be, yes, they each bring a unique perspective to the issues that are debated in the mother of our Parliament. And to propose that we get rid of them means that lost expertise will never be brought back. We will have a cheap imitation of the House of Commons, party political careerists who will simply seek to emulate their supposedly superior counterparts in the Commons. No, thank you. And I would say this would lead to gridlock. There's been references to the French Senate system, for example, although at times the French Senate has actually basically been the best friend of the President, because the French example is not great, because France is an executive presidency. The President exercises significant powers. It's not simply like the monarch here who has a largely ceremonial role. If the governing party in, say, France were to win a majority of the seats in the Senate and the Assemblée Nationale, there's no checks and there's no effective checks and balances at the heart of that system. It doesn't work. You have tyranny, as Montesquieu would have put it. No, thank you. We heard the proposition talk about what the parameters of an election would be, whether to reduce the size of the chamber in order to achieve a more effective lot of representatives, but that would require a written constitution, and written constitutions are fundamentally bad. We have I would argue, God-given constitution here in Britain, an ancient constitution that emerged from the English common law from time immemorial, no thank you, that it guarantees the freedoms. This delicate balance of king and parliament, unelected lords and the elected commons puts these different institutions in almost perfect harmony. I wouldn't trade it in for any other system in the world. No, thank you. So,
just to say that we on the opposition, we're not entirely elitists. We're not people who just, bang on about tradition for tradition's sake. Although I defer to Mr. Steele in that regard now. I understand that these newfangled modern ways of democracy are maybe not quite to his tastes. But we acknowledge, as Max outlined, we acknowledge the desire for increased accountability. There is scope for reform to these appointments processes. There is scope for reform within the current unelected system.
On that point?
No, thank you. To ensure better efficiency in terms of the scrutiny role that the Lords performs. I want to conclude with a call to turn back the clock on some of the monstrous innovations, supposed innovations, wrought on our ancient constitution by Mr. Tony Blair, a man who came closer than anyone else to destroying Britain. I would say that his decision in 1999 to reduce the number of hereditary peers to 92 has allowed the proliferation of political cronyism through a greater reliance on politically appointed life peers who are simply there, jobs for the boys, Tony's cronies, cash for ads, not cash for ads. Cash for honour, you name it. Turn back the clock and have a fully hereditary chamber with members who are not beholden to the whims of elected politics would mean that we could have a more effective scrutiny, legislative scrutiny. And on that note, reject Tony Blair, reject democracy, and vote with the ancient constitution, and reject the election of the House of Lords. Thank you. Thank you to all speakers for what was such a lively debate. We'll now turn to questions. So for those of you who aren't aware, how this works is we'll start with a question for the proposition will provide a response, and then the opposition will get the chance to also provide a response. Then we'll go for one for the opposition, and the same applies. And then we'll go to an abstention question, which must be put fairly to both sides. So firstly, do we have any questions for the proposition? We'll go with Evie first.
So there's this running theme throughout the speeches, and it became prominent in Kira's speech that you're saying you would elect the House of Lords, give them a democratic mandate, but keep the same structures and powers. That idea is only really tenable in a codified constitutional settlement. In a settlement like our own, where it's uncodified and the boundaries are amorphous, what's to stop future generations or future thinkers from taking the democratic mandate of this newly elected House and expanding the powers to the point where, monkey see, monkey do. The House of Lords is now just the House of Commons again, because there's no codified restraints on those boundaries.
The thing that stops that is the fact that constitution is written, and written constitutions are generally pretty difficult to change. In those examples, it's actually to be easier than to do without that, because there is not really anything except sort of an idea of tradition, which is fascinating. I think the politics generally to respect that kind of tradition. And the monkey see, monkey do thing, I don't think anybody really wants two Houses of Commons. I don't think there's no need or purpose for that. I mean, the point of having two chambers is that they serve two purposes. That's why there are bicameral systems all over the world, and none of them have two identical chambers. The concept of having two identical chambers is not necessary. I don't think anybody wants it. I don't think there will be a necessity nor a fear for future generations if it came to it.
Opposition to respond?
Yeah, I believe that really goes back to one of the things that I brought up, which none of the members of the proposition mentioned. In their idealistic world, they need to write a written constitution, get it passed in the Commons, pass the Supreme Court case. This is a very long-term commitment that will leave our scrutiny functions pretty much removed for close to a year, potentially two, depending on the length this legal case will require, to sort out the actual checks and balances on what is what and how are we going to prevent this new elected House of Lords from overreaching its powers. We've outlined that what they're proposing can be done just as easily without the time limit that they're going to have to deal with, through simple measures like just imposing an attendance mandate or changing the way we appoint our peers rather than making them specifically elected. So you're completely right. This is something that I don't think the proposition have fully dealt with. They've debated a motion in the sense that they've debated that the House of Lords isn't fit for purpose, not why we should elect them, and I don't think they've done that very well.
We have a question for the opposition, please. Oh.
Good job.
Go for it.
Sure, Max, one of your propositions was reforming the patronage and appointments process, basically saying it should be entirely done by an independent committee, and you can remove the issue if you just remove direct political patronage. The issue with that is, again, it comes back to having a codified or uncodified constitution without the codified boundaries to cement this appointments council and the criteria and the merits for which we should look for. There's nothing to stop statutory provisions from the political Commons chamber from dictating what the standards are, which they can then use to judge these peers based on merits.
That's a very fair criticism, but what I would say in regards to why ours is, the problem in that sense is that this would be brand new, whereas part of the reason on why this is much easier to do for us is that the House of Lords as it exists, because we have the Articles of Convention, the longer something has existed as the status quo, it's much more unassailable. The problem is that in their version, it would be pretty much fresh, free game, tear it apart as you will, whereas we're more sticking towards editing the status quo, which would be much easier. And I think if you take a look at other institutions that have been set up to make sure things are done respectfully and responsibly, for instance, the Office of Budget Responsibility, whenever the government tried to circumvent that and supersede power, Liz Truss happened and lettuce sort of abolished. So I believe with our system, it wouldn't be as much of an issue.
Proposition to respond?
I think there's kind of some bizarre understandings of the structures of government there. First of all, the discussion of editing the status quo, about how wonderful that idea is, but also bringing up the Supreme Court and the prior answer is certainly very interesting. It's a very clear misunderstanding of the Supreme Court works. But ignoring that, I think the vibe I'm getting from the opposition's answer is that this independent commission knows better than all of you. You the mere public haven't really got a clue. And this independent commission appointed by who knows what and who knows who knows better than any of you as to who should make your laws. And that doesn't really wash with me. As pointed out, who makes the criteria for what's a good lord? The House of Commons. At which point should we not just have our elected rep? Why bring in the middleman? Why don't we just elect the other guy? So it's not like so the point about justification kind of falls. The point about criteria and independence kind of falls if you elect it. And the point about the status quo, it just doesn't really work.
Thank you. Now, do we have any extension questions? Martin?
Yes, certainly. I'm not sure whether I'm breaking protocol here as a trustee, with the chairman's permission. I have a general question, which I'm asking to both sides. There's been a great debate, by the way, well done guys, and I've enjoyed the last two outstanding events instalment that we put that on the record, and good to see you back home here. Why have none of you talked about the use of communication technology to either enhance the effectiveness of the House of Commons or replace it? You're the young people who know how to use social media. You should be knowing how to use artificial intelligence. Why have none of you addressed that issue? And is that an issue worth talking about?
Proposition first.
That's actually, I hadn't thought about that at all. I suppose it kind of fires back to whenever over COVID, whenever PNQs was going to do it. I kind of talked the format of a lot of it. It's more something on a background, on a white background, just didn't kind of seem value and intellectual sparring with Peter Sutherland as a chamber. So I think on a point of kind of panache, flair and style, we should oppose that. because I think both Jack and I weep at the idea of not having our common circumstance in our either unelected or elected chambers. I suppose why we haven't dealt with it, it's just not, I think, those perhaps we're a bit unimaginative. We may be the next generation, but I think if you look at everyone in this panel, or at least most of us, are a little bit antiquated. Certainly stuck in the past, particularly the younger folk. So I suppose the short answer as to why we haven't thought about it, we're all a bit kind of blank. But I think we should oppose it on the simple basis of, I think it would take the fun out of Parliament.
Opposition to respond?
Well, despite being the oldest teenager that you'll ever meet, I actually have a unique understanding of communication within Parliament thanks to my insider information. that they currently in the House of Lords, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Chair, use a thing called Parliament Hub.
They also live stream it.
Yeah, well, this is true, but Parliament Hub's more integral because that allows, say, Lord Weir to vote from his phone using also there's a chip. If I'm not mistaken, your pass is a chip, which you go out into the division lobby and you hold that over and it comes up, and then that brings up the parliamentary interface. So communication and technology has been implemented at a level much higher than, as I remember, about any of our understandings. But I would say that if, and this is no disrespect to you, Mr. Chair, but if Lord Weir is able to get his head around the technology, that should be an indictment of the fact that the rest of us should be able to, clearly communication needs to be rolled out on a much bigger basis in Parliament to enhance.
I think, just by way of a point of information, because it's probably not germane to which side wins the game, those are my 2 points. Technically speaking, yes, within the Lords, I'm not sure that does apply. I don't think it applies in Commons. When you're voting, the methodology, you will still go through a lobby, you can't vote remotely, apart from a couple of exceptions. You will basically scan the pass and that, so there is that as well as that. What I would say as well is, I think they take on board the general point that both Dermot and Jack have made in terms of the theatre, particularly of the Commons of removal, is important. There is, I think, within the Lords, on rare occasions for a few peers who have previously had cleared with a particular committee, if there are any conflict cases, can get permission to contribute remotely. So it tends to be members with a particular permanent disability or maybe a terminal illness. And so particularly I can think of one here. And what will very occasionally happen, as you're relatively aware within the chamber, there will be, the speaker will actually stand up and say, and the next contribution is, particularly Lord Campbell Sabres, a Labour peer, I don't know what the background is in terms of illness, will come over by video link, but it is relatively rare. So there is the power of the technology that has been used at times. I think there's reluctance to move away from the theatre of what is there within the Commons or the Lords.
Thank you. And just so our guest chair can give his closing remarks and we can waive the general rule of neutrality for him, we will do the vote of speakerability before our guest chair gives his closing remarks, so nothing he says can directly lead into a vote either side, and he can give his unvarnished opinions. The vote on speakerability is not your general feeling on the motion, it is who you were most convinced by, who gave the best speech, who gave the best arguments. So for the motion, this House would elect the House of Lords. If you'd like to vote for the proposition, please raise your hands now.
Oh, well, that's fair.
I arrived late. Can I give you a petty vote?
If you'd like to vote for the opposition, please raise your hands now.
I love democracy.
And if you'd like to abstain, please raise your hand now. Shame. One.
That's fair enough.
God, it really is for those eyes closed.
I remember only half of these votes actually count.
I do have a system we didn't use.
Would you accept a peerage?
Can we get a vote on speakerability, please?
Yes, people will shut up. On the question at hand, on the vote was 4 votes for the proposition, because it was on there. 16 votes for the opposition, and 5 people are still in the Alliance Party. So, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5% on that. The opposition still has it.
Order of business this evening, can I welcome our guest chair, Lord Weir, to give some closing remarks.
Members, first of all, I congratulate you on what I think is an excellent debate. A lot of the points have been covered. I suppose maybe just to give some of my own take in relation to this. Prior to being, and maybe there's a little bit of poacher turned gamekeeper, prior to being elevated to the House of Lords, I probably had a lot more open view on this particular issue. I've probably been covered by a particular persuasion. I feel on balance, I suppose, that I would be with the opposition in relation to this for a number of reasons. I'll maybe come to that. I think the Lords, in many ways, is the best supporting actor of British democracy. It is not particularly high profile. It is not there as the key factor in the public eye. And I think democracy benefits from that. Principally, his role has been indicated is one of scrutiny, of one of holding government to account, a very detailed debate. And I think just to give you a little bit of a flavour of that, within the Commons, often with legislation, you will have perhaps an hour or two of debate. If you have, for instance, a stage where amendments can be taken, there can be quite a number of amendments taken in, but very few of them are actually spoken on or voted on. And generally speaking, the opportunity, people will rehearse simply party positions for a short period of time, and then they will move on very quickly. Within the Lords, time is largely unlimited within debate. And so you'll get particularly on what are not simply controversial pieces of legislation, but very important pieces of legislation, which first of all, there's no limit to the number of amendments that can be put down, and will quite often lead to very lengthy debate. It can sometimes be things that can go on perhaps for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 days worth of debate, and every amendment is debated, and every amendment is either voted upon or quite often withdrawn. A lot of them will be probing amendments in their nature. And while a lot of the focus will be on controversial legislation such as the Rwanda Bill, there are important pieces of legislation which do need at times improved and which benefit from that level of expertise, such as the Online Safety Bill, which again, there was, I think, from memory, I think nearly 100 speakers at the second reading of that debate, and moving to a situation which there was 300 or 400 amendments went down. And a lot of those were being brought forward by peers who had particular expertise in the subject, which wasn't necessarily there from members of the House of Commons. Again, while people come from a position where their views are influenced by their party political position, they are not tied to it. There are very few within the Lords who will seek high office. You see this as some route map towards a level of advancement. There has not been a member of the House of Lords who's been Prime Minister since really the end of the 19th century. And until recently, whenever Rishi Sunak sort of broke the emergency glass jar to let Lord Cameron into the Lords, that's been the last time, it's been the only time in the last 40 years where a senior member of government has been in the House of Lords. So it does mean that people can give probably a bit more of an independent view on particular issues. It is perfectly frequent for even members of a government party to vote against the government. One of the most proactive members who recently passed away, and I wouldn't have always found myself in the same lobbies as him, Lord Cormac, who was a parliamentarian of about 50 years standing, many years in the Lords, frequently opposed the government and was not constrained because of his position within that. And I think there is a danger that an elected chamber could simply put that at a level of doubt. Now, the argument, I suppose, is, and it's depending exactly how you do things, if you have an elected chamber which is elected at the same time and on the same basis as the Commons, does that simply become an echo chamber of what has been there in terms of the Commons, and effectively what is the point under those circumstances? If it risks, if it is on a slightly different basis, is there a level of tension between the two houses? Now, I think there was an interesting proposition that the proponents put forward to say that what they would see as a second chamber elected, but with effectively the same powers as is there in the Lords at present. Now, it is not an easy experience for anyone who's put themselves forward for elected office to ask somebody to put their name forward for that and say, but by the way, you're effectively going to be in, at best, the second 11. You're going to be in the second tier, you won't have the same powers. It's really, I suppose, to ask any politician to volunteer for castration. And without, and while this may dwell in sort of very binary sort of position in relation to that, I ask any of the male members here, who here, and I'm happy to take any interventions, would voluntarily accept castration as being something that would be there. Of course, the danger, yeah, but bigger is may not always be better, but presumably having something is better. It is the case that in terms of elections, the other alternatives would be either some hybrid, which gets away, I think, from the concept of elected chamber, if you have a mixture of elected and appointed members, or elections on a very different basis. But if, for example, and I think there's a very good point that's been made in terms of levels of regional balance, and I think some of the suggestions that have been put forward in terms of broader House of Lords reform would be to have some sort of constituencies based around the country. The problem with that is that then, unless it's simply replicating what is there in the House of Commons, it becomes a situation in which some regions will, by their nature, become overrepresented and some will be underrepresented. And the whole, I think, spirit, particularly of the House of Commons and parliamentary democracy, is that really there should be constituencies of equal size on that basis, and I think that undermines that. The other real danger, I think, within an elected chamber is, for want of a better word, who is there and who isn't there. The most likely scenario, I think, that you would have with an elected chamber, because I think you wouldn't simply want to have it on a constituency by constituency basis, replicates the House of Commons, would probably be some proportional representation system on a list basis that would be produced by the parties. In those circumstances, the concept of the second 11 becomes even more acute. It is then at that point. There never was, and those who hope to be at some stage in the future. We've had echoes of that. And Dermot, you may be more of an expert in this, in terms of sometimes those who've been in the Shannon in the south, where the more ambitious will look and see it as a treading water until they can find a position within the Dáil itself, you know, within that house of the Oireachtas, on that basis. But particularly if we assume that the people who are elected are then up for re-election, it's not just a one-off position, then you will be very much dependent upon whatever appointments are made by your party, where you are listed on that list in terms of a scoring mechanism. There are many things wrong with the House of Commons, and the whip system does mean that people are very much pushed in a particular direction, but quite often we see MPs of a very independent nature, possibly because they have within their locality support within their own constituency association to be able to keep on getting them re-elected on that basis. And that gives a level of independent thought. If you have a chamber which is largely based upon where you figure on what is a centrally chosen pecking order list from within your party, then I think there's a danger, the temptation for you to be in any way of any level of independent thought, because if you suddenly disappear in your region from number 1 on the list to number 115, then clearly that is the sort of Damocles which hangs over you on that basis. But finally, I suppose it's also in terms of who it excludes. And those who in the past would have been considered by the party at particular points troublemakers, maybe sort of visionaries for the future. And I appreciate these were members of the House of Commons at their particular time. But in the 1930s, if the Conservatives were appointing people to a second chamber, would Churchill, during the height of appeasement, have found favour with a Baldwin or a Chamberlain to be appointed to a second chamber? Would Wilberforce in the 1780s have been considered someone who was sound enough to be appointed into that position or elected into that position? How much of a Michael Foot or a Tony Benn or Enoch Powell from their respective parties at particular times would have been appointed? And those kind of independent voices we missed out. But also I think fundamentally, and while most people reflect and come through a party system, we have around about 30% of the peers are people who are drawn from, who are deliberately crossbenchers and independent members, some of which bring a vast range of experience. We have, and I appreciate there can be probably an element of elitism that can be raised at this, we have former chiefs of staff of the defence side of it. We have former heads of the civil service. We have the likes of Baroness Butler Schloss, who was a leading judge, or Baroness Tanny Gray Thompson, Paralympian. We do have others who would come from an independent background but have then taken the whip of a party. So someone like Robert Winston, who's probably the leading geneticist within the UK. And those people bring a level of expertise and knowledge to the chamber, which I think in any elected system would be very difficult to be able to replicate. In part because even if they were persuaded to put their names through the party system, how many people with the best will in the world on the basis of a high level of profession would simply opt out of that profession simply to try to seek an elected office? There's very little bit of a crossover in that regard. And that doesn't mean, and at this point I think Jack will have to sort of close his ears a little bit, simply saying that I think an elected chamber is not the answer doesn't mean that there can't be reform of the chamber. And I think the concept of, for instance, prime ministers as part of theirs having resignation honours lists is something that I think will be looked at and needs to be looked at. I should point out, one of the things which has both a good and a bad side to it is that the current appointment process, every name does go through an appointments process and it is scrutinised. A Prime Minister can force through a name, but it is also the case, and in many, many cases, because that is done quite privately and quite secretly, there are a lot of names put forward for the House of Lords which are simply deemed inappropriate and are then withdrawn. Suggestions, I don't know how true they were, that Boris Johnson tried to put his father in the House of Lords, that was effectively blocked by the system. And I think we may look to see where we can give better teeth to that. There will be an active debate on hereditary peers in probably the next chamber. I think, unfortunately, Jack, it's probably on the basis of whether they're abolished rather than expanded. But if we look actually at everything that has happened with the House of Lords in over a century, it is a very changing beast in that regard. It is one which has been evolution rather than revolution. And those who have said there are many things wrong with our democracy are absolutely right. But I think that having an elected House of Lords, in my view, is not the solution to those problems and actually then ignores many of the problems. So in conclusion, I would simply say an elected House of Lords may seem to be a no-brainer, but having an appointed chamber, I suppose, to paraphrase Churchill on democracy, he said that democracy was the worst possible system of government, except for all the alternatives. And I think when weighed against the balance of what the alternatives are, I think that having some form of appointed chamber is the better system than an elected chamber, which is probably why there was never a consensus, even with a very large Labour majority in the 1990s, for its change. Why any party which has sometimes thrown red meat to some of its supporters by saying it will abolish it has always backed off that particular notion. And I suppose the need for a second chamber has been shown that anybody putting any proposal for constitutional reform has always put forward a second chamber. So I congratulate you, I think, on what was an excellent debate, and Well done, I think, to every speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and can I place on the record my personal thanks and the thanks of the entire Society's Council for coming this evening, chairing the debate. Your attendance has really lifted the level of the debate. I think it's made it. I think it has made it a much better affair.
Just one clarification. Where did Britain travel and?
Ella, the treasurer, and the expenses. But no, thank you very much for coming. So can we have another round of applause? Thank everyone, including our two other trustees, Martin at the back and Calvin, our newest trustee, for joining us this evening. Yeah, but you were speaking. For joining us this evening, and thank you to everyone for coming out. And we are all going to the pub at Lavery's after this. Thank you for the reminder. So please do all feel free to join us there. Can we get speakers and our guest chair to the front for a photo? Thank you very much.